In this video, we're going to start to learn about what we call constructions. So in geometry, when we talk about constructions, it means that we're creating a specific design that's using two instruments. So a compass and a straight edge. So a compass is the first thing that you have to have in front of you. So if you don't have that, pause the video, go grab it. And a compass, remember, looks like this. So this is going to be used to measure our distances. So this is our measuring tool. Because if you notice when it says straight edge, our straight edge means it's technically you're using your ruler, but we're using it as a straight edge. So we're not measuring anything. So it's never used to measure. It's used to draw straight lines or straight segments. So your compass is how you're going to measure. So you're going to use the opening. You're going to adjust the opening of your compass to measure something. So when we're doing this, sometimes you might think, well, I want to get rid of arcs or lines or things that are created from the compass, so little arcs that you're going to see. You always want to keep those because that's indicating to whoever's looking at your paper, you always want them to know that you actually used a compass and a straight edge to do this. You didn't just kind of eyeball and make up some stuff. So that stuff is going to be very important, all the arcs and construction marks that you use. So keeping those. So for the first construction that we're going to look at, it's called copying a segment. So basically you're going to create a segment that's congruent to a given segment. And like I said, we're not using our ruler to measure it. So we are using our compass and then we're using our straight edge to actually connect and make a straight line afterwards. So if we look at the example here, we want to construct AB such that AB is congruent to PQ, which basically means I need to make a segment that's the same length as PQ. I'm going to call it AB. Now remember, you're not going to take your ruler, you're not going to measure and say, oh, this is 3 inches or this is 10 centimeters. You're actually going to use your ruler as a straight edge and your compass is going to do the measuring. So the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out, well, where do I want to place my new segment? So this is kind of up to you. Unless it specifies in the problem, you can decide where you want the segment to go. So I'm going to say I'm going to make my new segment start right here. So I'm going to call this point A. I need to make AB so that it's the same length as PQ. So I'm going to take my compass, I'm going to place the metal point on one of the endpoints of the segment, and I'm going to extend out the opening until I get to the other endpoint. This right here is me measuring the length of this segment. So now I'm going to mark an arc on point Q that's basically telling you that I actually measured this with my compass by marking that arc. So we have to keep that there. Then I'm going to take my compass, I'm going to move it up to point P, keeping that distance the same because that's the length of PQ, and I'm going to mark an arc now that represents the same distance as P and Q. So the distance between points P and Q is the distance between A and any point on this arc because I've just measured it. So any point on that arc is going to be my point B because any point on this arc is the same distance. So it's almost like you're making A the center of your circle and this is a point on the circle if you imagine extending it out. That's why this is working. So you're kind of forcing PQ to be the radius of your circle. So now with my straight edge, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect these points. So from A to B. And notice I purposely did this so that they didn't look parallel because they don't have to be. So notice that these segments are the exact same measurement because I used my compass opening to measure it and copy it. So now I can say that these two segments are congruent to each other. So we could put a little slash on them representing that they are the same length because I measured them with my compass. Let's go ahead and try another example where we're going to be using segments, but now we're going to make triangles with the segments. So all it really means is instead of copying a segment once, you're going to copy it 3 times. So in this case, if we're trying to construct an equilateral triangle, well, that means we have to have 3 congruent sides. So this one's going to be the easiest one because you're just going to copy this side 3 times, which means you measure it once and you're just going to reproduce it 3 times. So I'm going to start with, let me open my compass. So I have my compass and I need to pick a place where I want my triangle to start. So pick a point wherever you want it to start. So let's say I'm going to start it right here. So that's where I'm going to start my triangle. I'm going to take my compass. Does it tell us? Doesn't tell us on, oh no, it does. PQR is what we're going to call it. So I'm going to, I guess, call this point P. Oops. So point P. So now I'm going to take my compass and I'm going to measure the opening or the distance between points A and B. So opening the compass, and I'm marking that point, or marking an arc through B, so you know that you measured it. Now remember, it doesn't really matter if you start at A and go to B, or if you start at B and go to A. Your arc will just be in a different spot, so it doesn't matter where that metal point goes. You're just measuring the length of that segment. So now I'm going to move my my compass down here, and I'm going to draw. So I'm copying this segment, so I'm going to go ahead and mark an arc. I'm going to keep that opening the same and just kind of set it off to the side for a minute. And I'm going to put point Q down here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect those. So this is the bottom of my triangle, or the one side of my triangle. So from here, I need to copy two more segments that are the same length as AB. So what I'm going to do, one segment has to come from point P, one segment has to come from point Q, but I have to make sure I know where where the intersection of the arcs are going to be, so that I'm making sure that my third point keeps the distance the same from P as it does from Q. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my compass. It's the same length, remember? And I know that it's going to intersect somewhere up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a larger arc. I don't know exactly where, but any point on this arc is the same distance as A to B. And then I'm going to take this, so I can't place the point yet because I have to make sure that this third point is the same distance away from P as it is from Q. So now I'm going to go to Q, and I'm going to draw an arc large enough so that I can see the intersection. Because remember, any point on this arc is the distance of AB, or the length of AB. And any point on this other arc is the distance of AB. But where the distances are the same, what point the distance is the same from P as it is from Q is this intersection right here. So this is going to be my triangle PQR. So it's going to be point R. So now when I draw in my segments, I know that this distance from P to R is the same as AB, and the distance from R to Q is the same, because those arcs represented the same distance of AB. I kept my compass opening exactly the same every time. So these sides are all congruent, making it equilateral. So that's really the process. We're going to look at isosceles and scalene. The only difference is when we construct isosceles, we're going to have two equal sides. Scalene, we're going to have three different sides. But basically, you're just copying your segments, and then for the third point, you always have to see where the last two segments intersect so that you make sure that you're satisfying both conditions, or both segments satisfy the condition that you're trying to satisfy. So let's look at isosceles triangle. So for this one, isosceles triangle means two congruent sides. So it says that we're going to make, for this picture here, CD is going to be the base. So typically we see the base on the bottom, doesn't have to be, but that's going to be the side that's not equal to the other two. AB is the leg, so that means these are going to be the two equal sides. So those are the ones I'm going to copy twice. So I'm actually going to start with CD, and let's do that one first, because typically when you draw an isosceles triangle, you see the non-equal sides on the bottom. Not that that's the only way to do it, but that's typically how you're used to seeing it, so I'm going to stick with that. So I extend this out. We're going to measure to D, draw my arc. And it doesn't tell us what to call these sides, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put, I'm going to call them prime letters, and I'll explain that in a second. So I'm going to put C here, and I'm going to call it C prime. So that little symbol there means prime. You're going to see this a lot in our next unit, but C prime means that it's coming from C, just because I want you to see where these things are coming from. So I have, over here, I've measured my C to D, so I'm going to draw my arc. Any point on that red arc is going to be D prime, because it came from D. And you don't have to name your triangle this way. You can just use 3 different letters if you want. It doesn't matter. But there, I just wanted to show you that that came from CD. So that's why I use C prime and D prime. So it's different letters, but you know where it came from. So there's the bottom. Now I got to construct the 2 legs, which are the congruent pieces, which I'm going to use AB to do that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to extend out measure AB. And I'm going to mark these using a different color. So there's my arc. And I need to have this leg twice coming from point C prime and also coming from point D. I need that distance to be the same. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make my arc large enough so that I don't have to worry about going back and redrawing the arc to make sure that I get an intersection. I'm going to go from point D prime and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw my arc so that I see the intersection. Those distances, so at this point, I'm the same distance away from C prime as I am from D prime, and that distance is AB. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to mark our point. I'll just call this E prime, even though I don't have anything with E, but just so it's a different letter. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect them. And there's my isosceles triangle. So I can say, okay, well, these 2 legs are the same, so I can mark those congruent. So I'm just copying these segments over and over is what we're doing. And then the last one here is our scalene triangle. So this is going to be a scalene triangle, which means 3 different sides. So for this one, you basically just have to take each of these sides and use it once and make a triangle out of it. It doesn't matter which one's on the bottom or which one's on the sides because they're all different. So you just kind of pick and choose. So let's just say I go right down the line here. So I'm going to start with A, and I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to copy from the endpoint all the way to the other endpoint. Now there's not endpoints that are clearly drawn, so just make sure you go from one edge of the segment to the other edge. And then let's go ahead and let's give ourselves space. Let's do it down here. So we have, here's going to be my starting point. So I'm forcing this to be the starting point. Take my compass and slide it down, being careful about keeping that opening the same. Drawing my arc. So there's my first segment. I'm going to go ahead and actually draw in the segment. So remember, you have your point here. So I'll say that this is A, this is B. I'm just making up letters here, so whatever you want to use is fine. So there's my first segment. So that's the segment A that they gave me. So going from point to point. And remember, I can place that point B anywhere on that arc because that'll be the same distance away. Then I'm going to go to the next one. And remember, you can do these in any order. I'm just going down the line, so I don't have to worry about thinking, okay, which one didn't I use yet? So now I'm going to mark this, and I'm going to bring this down, this opening, and I'm going to place this wherever I want. So let's say I place it on A, or I could place it on endpoint B, whatever you want to do. This one, you might want to make your arc pretty big, because if you look at C, it's pretty long. So C might end up having to cross over on this side, or it might end up crossing over here. So you just have to, you know, it kind of depends on the scenario. So it's probably going to end up crossing over in here if you look at C. So let's go ahead and now get C. And you can always come back and redraw the arc if you need to. So if you're looking at it and you are like, wait, my arcs don't cross, well, that just means you have to go back and re-extend one. And this, my compass isn't wide enough for. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, if your compass opens to the full length of this segment, use it. If not, just extend this, or just extend it as far as you can, and then make your point there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scribble out the rest of the segment. So my arc is going to be right here. So on a test, that won't happen. Yours might actually work. It's just on the computer here. It's not. So I'm going to use my opening like that. Adjust your segment if you needed to. And then I'm going to go from point B and I'm looking for where they're going to intersect. So it's way over here. So like I said, if you, when you drew your arc A, you might have only drawn it here because that's how the intersections have been. They've only been right up above the segment. But in this case, my intersection is more shifted to the left. So you might have had to go back and redraw that blue arc so that you actually see the intersection. So that can happen, not a big deal. You just have to go back and copy the segment over, basically. Go back and measure it and then extend the arc out. So now I have my point. And remember, your triangle might be slightly different. Yours might be more off to the side here because your compass probably extended the full way, and mine doesn't. So your intersection might be more like on the left here. So just keep that in mind, which is totally fine. And then I have my triangle. And for this one, all three sides are different, so you could leave it either unmarked or you could do different slashes to represent 3 different side lengths. So that's it. So that's a scalene. So basically, copying a segment, you just measure the segment with your compass, and then keeping your arcs is important. For triangles, you measure one segment at a time. Once you get your first segment, you go from each endpoint and draw your other 2 segments. And then where the other 2 segments cross is where your triangle is. So that's the concept. So go ahead and try the check your understanding problems. It's a little bit different. It's not just drawing a triangle, but read through it and see if you can figure it out from there.